A police officer was patrolling a quiet snow-covered highway in Colorado. Then he saw it. A German shepherd blindfolded, bleeding, unmoving standing guard beside a torn pink backpack as if it held someone's soul. When he peeled away the tape and opened the bag, what he found would haunt him forever. But what happened next? It might just restore your faith in humanity. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. And if you believe that no dog should ever be thrown away like trash, hit that subscribe button, because this story might change the way you see love, loss, and loyalty. The wind had teeth that morning in Ash Hollow, Colorado. A ghostly veil of snow drifted across the deserted stretch of Highway 82, swirling like spirits that hadn't yet found peace. The early sun barely broke through the clouded sky, casting a pale, cold light over the pine-covered foothills. It was the first true snowfall of the season, and with it came a silence that even engines seemed hesitant to disturb. Officer Eli Carson gripped the steering wheel of his cruiser with one hand, the other wrapped around a thermos of black coffee that had long gone lukewarm. He was 44, built lean but weathered, like a barn left standing through too many winters. His dark hair was streaked with silver near the temples, and fine lines carved deep beneath his eyes etched by years of worry and restless nights. He wore his sheriff's jacket zipped to the neck, though the chill in his chest had little to do with the temperature outside. Eli had been a father once. That identity used to pulse louder than the badge. But 3 years ago, his daughter, Grace, 10 years old, bright as spring, had been killed in a traffic accident on this very road. Since then, he had driven this route hundreds of times, as if patrolling grief itself. He still lived in the same house, still poured 2 mugs of cocoa every winter night. One for him, one for the ghost that never came back. The crackle of the police radio was the only sound until he saw it. Felt it before he even registered what it was. A figure by the roadside. Still, unmoving. He slowed the cruiser, drawing closer. It was a dog, a German shepherd, standing upright, legs trembling slightly. Snow dusted its matted black and tan fur. Its eyes were hidden beneath layers of silver duct tape wound tightly around its head. The tape shimmered under the snowflakes like cold steel. Only its nose poked through, wet and chapped from the bitter air. Its paws were raw cracked and bleeding pressed into the salt-stained asphalt. Steam rose faintly from the animal's body, mixing with the mist curling off the ground. But the most haunting detail wasn't the blindfold, nor the wounds. It was the silence. The dog didn't bark, didn't whimper, didn't move. It stood like a sentinel before a monument no one else could see. At its feet was a small pink backpack, torn along the zipper, half buried in a crust of slush. Stickers peeled at the corner stars, hearts, a princess with blonde curls and a wand. Something about the backpack, the size, the softness, tightened a screw deep in Eli's chest. He stopped the cruiser, hit the emergency lights, and stepped into the wind. "Easy," he said gently, crouching low. "You're all right, buddy." The dog didn't flinch, but its ears twitched. It was young, maybe 3 or 4 years old. Big for its age, though a long winter had stolen its weight. Its left flank bore a faint scar that ran like a river beneath the fur, and its ribs pushed out visibly, as if trying to escape its own chest. Eli inched forward. His boots crunched over grit and ice. He was used to dangerous dogs' drug busts gone wrong, wild-eyed canines that had turned feral in cages, but this wasn't that. This was grief in flesh and fur. The dog seemed to be guarding the backpack like it held the last breath of someone it loved. As Eli drew closer, he saw something else. 2 paw prints beside the dog, smaller, lighter, etched into the snow like the fading memory of someone who once stood there. He squatted down beside the pink bag and unzipped it slowly. The dog gave a soft, ragged inhale but didn't attack. Inside was a child's spiral notebook. The first page was curled and stuck with frost. He peeled it open with gloved fingers. There it was. Written in purple marker and backward slants, Laney's Journal. He paused. The name didn't ring a bell from any recent missing person reports, but then again, the world didn't always report its tragedies. He flipped a few pages. Stickers covered the margins, unicorns, cupcakes, a smiling puppy with a crown. But between the doodles were strange, fragmented sentences. I don't like the basement. He said, don't talk, or the dog gets punished. Ranger says I'm brave. I want to go home, but I don't know where that is anymore. Ranger. Eli looked up at the shepherd. Is that you? He murmured. The dog, Ranger, didn't move, but his breath came faster, his nostrils flaring. Somehow, the name had registered. Eli's voice cracked. Where's Laney? Just then, a gust of wind picked up, swirling snow and kicking up a page from the notebook that fluttered out onto the road like a feather. He snatched it before it blew away. On it was a crude drawing stick figures, a girl with long hair and a smile, a dog with pointy ears beside her. The sun, a house, and then, off to the side, a man with no face. He felt the nausea coil in his gut. Behind him, a car honked and sped by, oblivious to the unfolding tragedy just a few feet from the shoulder. Eli stood, heart thudding. He opened the cruiser door and grabbed a fleece blanket from the back seat. Approaching Ranger slowly, he whispered, "Let me help you now." The dog didn't resist when Eli gently wrapped the blanket around him, nor when he lifted the backpack with the journal and drawing still inside. Ranger staggered as Eli tried to guide him forward, his back legs shaking. "It's all right," Eli murmured again. They made it to the cruiser. The dog hesitated, sniffing the step, then slowly climbed inside. Eli placed the pink backpack on the seat beside him. As he drove off, he glanced into the rearview mirror. Ranger had curled up, one paw resting protectively over the bag. Snow tapped gently against the window. For the first time in a long while, Eli didn't feel like he was driving alone. Snow crunched under the tires as Eli pulled into the gravel lot of the Ash Hollow Animal Clinic, a modest cedarwood structure tucked between two bare oak trees and a faded grain silo. A blue metal sign swung lazily in the wind above the door. Healing hands, gentle hearts. It was quiet except for the occasional gust of wind brushing powdery snow across the steps. The sky had turned from gray to a pale white, as if the world itself had exhaled and gone still. Eli turned off the ignition and glanced back at Ranger, who still lay curled on the back seat. One paw remained draped protectively over the pink backpack, as if even in his exhaustion, the dog wasn't willing to let it out of his sight. "Come on, soldier," Eli said softly. He opened the door, wrapping Ranger again in the fleece blanket before lifting him into his arms. The dog didn't resist, though a low, dry grunt slipped from his throat. His body was heavier than Eli expected, dense, not with weight, but with burden. Inside the clinic, warmth embraced them like a long-lost memory. The scent of antiseptic and dog shampoo hung in the air. Fluorescent lights buzzed gently overhead. A tall woman with cropped red hair looked up from the front desk. She was in her early 50s, with fine crow's feet etched at the corners of her sea-green eyes and a no-nonsense air softened by genuine kindness. Her name tag read, Dr. Marlene Greaves. "Eli Carson," she said, arching a brow. "When I heard you were bringing in a dog, I assumed it was another raccoon bite." "Not today, Mar," Eli said, shifting the bundle in his arms. "This one's different." Her eyes fell on the blanket. "Exam room 2. I'll grab my kit." Inside the room, Eli placed Ranger on the steel exam table, gently unwinding the fleece. Marlene entered a moment later, gloved and focused. Her hands moved with practiced precision, but when she saw Ranger's face, particularly the tight rings of duct tape scarring the fur around his eyes, her expression hardened. "Jesus, Eli." "I found him like that on 82, Eli said. "He wasn't just dumped. He was abandoned with purpose." Marlene gently tilted Ranger's head, inspecting the skin beneath the adhesive residue. Her jaw tensed. "It's deliberate. 3 wraps, symmetrical. Someone knew what they were doing." She carefully began cutting away the remaining adhesive fragments. Ranger winced, but made no sound. His eyes, once revealed, were a deep, soulful amber. There was no wildness in them, just a raw, unfiltered ache. "He's maybe 3, she murmured. "Poor nutrition. Front left paw is cracked and bleeding. He's got old breaks, see here?" She touched a ridge beneath the shoulder fur. "Never set properly. Probably mended on their own." As she moved down the body, her fingers paused at a series of faint, raised scars around the rib cage. "These look like belt marks." Eli swallowed hard, his hands clenched in his pockets. "He has a microchip," Marlene continued, scanning between the shoulder blades. A beep. She looked at the screen, then frowned. Unregistered. It was probably implanted, but never activated. No name, no owner history. Eli reached down to rest a hand on Ranger's back. "Then I'm calling him Ranger. It's the name in her notebook." "She." He nodded toward the backpack. Marlene followed his gaze. Later, while Ranger lay sedated for a deeper examination, Eli sat alone in the waiting room with the backpack open on his lap. Snow had started falling again outside the clinic windows, soft and steady, like ash from a quiet fire. He pulled out a crumpled sheet from one of the front pockets. It was a drawing, a child's hand, scribbled with innocence. A girl with stick arms, wild hair, and bright blue circles for eyes stood beside a much larger dog under a leafy tree. Above them, in a shaky scrawl, was written, "Me plus Ranger equals safe place." Eli ran a thumb over the word safe. He could feel the girl's hope still soaked into the ink. There was something else he hadn't noticed before, a faint tear in the backpack's strap, with frayed threads and something darker staining the edge. Upon closer inspection, he saw it, the outline of small, shallow indentations. Teeth marks. Not fresh, but not old either. Someone, or something, had tried to yank it away. A memory surged uninvited. His daughter Grace's backpack, torn and tossed by the roadside after the accident. He had found it before they'd found her. The smell of strawberries still clung to the fabric. He closed his eyes against the wave. "Eli." He turned. Marlene stood in the doorway, removing her gloves. "He's stable for now. I've cleaned the wounds, started fluids, and he's sleeping. He's lucky someone found him." Eli stood. He wasn't going to leave that backpack. Marlene nodded, then hesitated. "I don't know what this dog's been through, but whatever it was, it left a mark deeper than his ribs." Eli looked past her toward the closed exam room door. "So did life," he said quietly. Outside, the wind howled gently through the pines. Snow continued to fall, erasing the morning's harsh outlines and softening the world beneath a layer of white. Ranger was safe for now. But Eli knew that healing didn't begin with safety. It began with truth, and somewhere between the scars on the dog's body and the words in a little girl's notebook, that truth was waiting. The snowstorm that had blanketed Ash Hollow the day before had faded by nightfall, leaving the town silent and washed in moonlight. The streets were crusted in ice, roofs glimmered under frost, and the world felt paused. Eli Carson pulled into his narrow driveway, headlights carving gentle arcs against the snowbanks flanking his modest two-story home. The house, painted a faded slate blue, stood quietly under the stars, as if holding its breath for something long overdue. Inside, the warmth smelled like pine and old memories. The wood stove crackled in the corner of the living room. Eli laid a thick flannel blanket across the floor near it and lowered Ranger onto the fabric. The dog's muscles stiffened slightly before relaxing. Though sedated, the German shepherd remained alert, eyes flickering toward the doorway like a soldier too long in combat to ever fully rest. Ranger looked better under lamplight. His fur was cleaner now, though thin in places. He had the sturdy build of a working dog, but there was something regal about him too, the way he held himself despite the scars. The tip of his left ear bent downward, a permanent crease that made him seem both noble and vulnerable. His amber eyes never left the pink backpack, which Eli had placed gently a few feet from him. The dog's gaze lingered there like a tether, invisible but unbreakable. Eli took off his coat and stood by the fire, stretching out stiff shoulders. The house creaked gently in the cold, the kind of sound that made it feel more alive than abandoned. He hadn't had company in a long while, not since Grace died, and his wife left the town soon after, broken by the loss in ways Eli couldn't reach. He brewed coffee out of habit, 2 mugs. One he drank. The other sat untouched on the small kitchen table, across from the seat that no one filled anymore. Before going to bed, he placed a shallow bowl of water and some leftover chicken stew near Ranger's blanket. The dog didn't move, didn't eat. He just watched. That night, Eli didn't sleep well. He dreamed of screeching tires on black ice, of headlights blinking against shattered glass, of a tiny pink shoe lying in a ditch. Then, the worst part, the silence after, the kind that never truly goes away. He awoke just before dawn, slick with sweat, and stumbled into the hallway. Ranger was still awake, still curled near the pink backpack, his eyes open, ears twitching at every sound. The stew remained untouched, but his body was tense with quiet vigilance, as if something inside him refused to give way to comfort. Eli crouched next to him, rubbing a hand slowly down Ranger's back. "You don't trust it yet, huh?" he whispered. "Safe house, but still feels like war." He sighed and stood, walking toward the backpack. The journal inside was heavier now, not in weight, but meaning. He flipped through the pages under the soft light of a desk lamp. A child's handwriting, purple marker. Doodles of flowers, hearts, and stars. In between, words that didn't belong to childhood. The lock clicks loud. He says don't bark. Sometimes I pretend Ranger is a knight and I'm a princess stuck in a tower. If I be quiet, maybe we both get dinner. He said if I talk, he'll take Ranger away. Eli's hands shook slightly as he turned another page. The child's mind had found fantasy to survive, creating a fairy tale cage for a horror too cruel to name. "Who were you running from, Laney?" he muttered. Outside, there was a soft knock at the front door, 3 short taps. Eli flinched, startled, and grabbed his flashlight from the entry table. He opened the door slowly to reveal a bundled figure standing beneath a snow-dusted porch light. Rachel Kimball, his neighbor from 2 houses down, stood with gloved hands wrapped around a hot pie tin. She was in her early 70s, tall but stooped, with thin silver hair pinned beneath a knit cap. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her eyes sharp and observant beneath wire-framed glasses. A retired schoolteacher, Rachel had a voice like warmed cider, and a memory sharp enough to recall every child she'd taught over 3 decades. Since the death of her husband 10 years ago, she'd lived alone, kept her own garden, and brought Eli pies he rarely ate but never refused. "I saw your cruiser last night," she said softly. "Figured you didn't get a chance to eat." "Thanks, Rachel. Come in a minute, it's freezing." She stepped inside, the pie warming the space between them. Her gaze immediately found Ranger, who had turned his head but remained motionless. "Well," she said after a long moment, "he's beautiful and broken." Eli nodded, accepting the truth in both words. Rachel approached slowly. She had always been gentle around animals, maybe because she never had children of her own, or maybe because she understood something about the wounded heart. "Who does the bag belong to?" she asked. "A girl named Laney," Eli replied. "Or used to." Rachel's lips thinned. "I've seen that look before, in some of my students, the ones who flinched when someone raised their voice, or stayed late because they didn't want to go home." She knelt near the backpack, tracing a finger over one of the stickers. "Wherever she is," she said, "this dog guarded her with everything he had." Later, after Rachel had gone and the pie sat untouched on the counter, Eli returned to the journal, now resting in his lap like a silent plea. Ranger had shifted slightly, his paw now resting on the corner of the pink backpack. Outside, the sun rose slowly, brushing pale gold across the snow-covered town. Inside, the house had changed. It was still quiet, still full of shadows, but now there was a presence in the silence, a guardian watching, a truth waiting. And somewhere between the burned pages of Laney's journal and the scars beneath Ranger's fur, Eli began to understand that they weren't just recovering a dog. They were unraveling a history. The snow had begun to melt, leaving behind patches of wet earth and tangled roots beneath the thinning white. It was the kind of day where the forest felt half-asleep branches bare, light filtering weakly through a pale sky, the scent of damp pine clinging to everything. Eli Carson zipped his sheriff's jacket higher and glanced down at Ranger, who stood beside him on the trail, nose twitching. They were following no path, just instinct. Ranger had begun pacing the house that morning, agitated, circling the door and pawing lightly at the floor. When Eli opened the back door, the dog bolted down the steps and stood in the snow, waiting. Something in his posture tight, deliberate, alert told Eli this wasn't just a walk. They moved along the tree line behind Eli's property, past a crumbling wire fence and into the woods. Ranger led, sometimes pausing to sniff, then trotting ahead, head low. His movements had changed since the night before, no longer stiff with fear, but driven by purpose. "Where are we going, boy?" Eli muttered, more to himself than the dog. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the sound of distant traffic began to bleed through the trees. Eli recognized it. Route 17 curved around the western edge of town. Then, a sudden blare of a semi-truck horn cut through the cold air like a whip. Ranger froze. His entire body tensed. A low, guttural whine escaped him, and his front paws began to backpedal through the slush. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open. Panic clawed up his throat. Eli crouched down quickly. "Hey, hey, it's all right." But Ranger's body shook, and he spun once in place, his nose pressed to the ground, then to Eli's leg, then he took off, not away from the sound, but toward the denser part of the woods. Eli swore and followed. They ran for several minutes, ducking low-hanging branches and slipping through dead leaves. Then Ranger stopped. Not abruptly, but with a slow, reverent pause. They stood before a tall, gnarled oak tree split down the center, blackened by what had clearly been a lightning strike. Char marks trailed up the trunk, and a portion of the roots was exposed, twisted like broken fingers. Ranger circled the base, then began pawing at a specific patch of dirt, growling softly. Eli joined him, brushing away snow and leaf litter. Beneath the soil, something metallic caught the light. A small tin box, army-style, green and rusted at the edges. Someone had buried it, not deeply, but enough to keep it hidden from casual discovery. He pulled it free. The latch was stiff from age and moisture, but it clicked open with a reluctant snap. Inside, a weathered photograph and a USB drive taped to the lid. Eli pulled out the photo first. It was bent at the corners, the colors faded but still clear. A young girl, Lainey, stood grinning with her arms around Ranger. She was missing her front teeth and wore a blue dress with glitter stars. Standing behind her, with a hand on her shoulder, was a man. Late 30s, Caucasian, broad build, hair close-cropped with a slight widow's peak. He wore a dark flannel and a forced smile, too tight, like someone posing for a role they didn't want. Eli felt something cold and sharp twist inside him. That wasn't a father. That was a placeholder. Ranger growled low in his throat, his eyes fixed on the photo. Back at the house, Eli laid the items on the dining table under a desk lamp. The USB was ordinary black plastic with a red slider, but its presence felt weighty. He didn't plug it in yet, not without knowing what was on it. He reached for his phone instead and took a photo of the man's face, then sent it to Rachel with a short message. "Recognize this guy?" He barely had time to set the phone down before it rang. Rachel's voice was sharp, breathless. "That's Derek. Derek Morrison." "Who?" Lainey's mom dated him a few years ago. He used to come by my classroom when they picked her up. I always got a bad feeling about him. Controlling. The kind of man who stands too close and never lets you forget it. Eli's pulse quickened. "You remember anything else?" She stopped showing up with Lainey after a while. Then they moved. I didn't see them again. Rumor was she lost custody. He looked over at Ranger, who was now lying under the window, still alert, his eyes trained on the table like he was guarding the truth itself. Eli thanked Rachel and hung up. So, Derek Morrison. No records in Ash Hollow, but probably something if he dug deeper. The name itself felt like a key in a locked door, and Ranger had led him right to it. He walked back to the table, picked up the photo again. This time he noticed something small in the corner, barely visible through the fading ink. The base of the tree behind them was marked by a scar down its center. The lightning-struck oak. Eli sat down hard in the kitchen chair, the legs creaking under him. That tree wasn't just a spot Ranger remembered. It was the spot where something had happened, where something had been hidden. He stared at the USB. Tomorrow, he'd take it to the station and open it there, somewhere secure. Tonight, though, he watched Ranger finally fall asleep, his body curled beside the pink backpack, his breathing slow and even. And outside, the forest held its breath again. Something was waking up. A truth, long buried. And Eli Carson was no longer just a grieving father or a tired cop. He was a man chasing justice for a girl with stars on her dress and a dog who never stopped protecting her. The morning light in Ash Hollow came hesitant and pale, like it wasn't sure it wanted to reveal what the night had hidden. Eli Carson sat in the corner of the sheriff's office, a weathered concrete building with sun-streaked windows and heating that worked only when it felt generous. Ranger lay curled at his feet, his large frame a warm, steady presence in the otherwise sterile room. He had insisted on bringing the dog with him, not just for company, but because this wasn't just about a case anymore. It was about both of them. On the desk in front of Eli sat the USB drive. The black plastic was now taped to a manila evidence envelope, its edges worn from his fingers. Next to it was his laptop, ancient, cracked at the hinge, and slow but functional. A cup of burnt coffee steamed gently to his left. He plugged the USB in, held his breath. A folder appeared on the screen. Laney, private. Inside were 5 video files. He clicked the first one. Static buzzed before the feed steadied. A grainy black-and-white shot of a small living room, a couch, a child-sized mattress in the corner, and Laney. Barefoot, hair tangled, sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing in a spiral notebook. Ranger appeared beside her, tail still, eyes watchful. She looked up every few seconds as if listening for something outside the frame. Then a door opened in the background. A man entered. Derek Morrison. Eli recognized him from the photo. Derek was taller in motion, with a lumbering gait and shoulders hunched from long-term anger. His voice came muffled, but Eli could hear the edge in it. "Why are the lights still on?" Laney flinched. "I forgot." "Don't lie." The screen shook as the man yanked the lamp cord. The room darkened. Eli clenched his jaw. He fast-forwarded. In another clip, Laney lay on the mattress, clutching Ranger tightly. The little girl whispered something into his ear. Eli turned up the volume. "If you're still alive one day, please find someone good. Someone better than Mommy." The dog blinked slowly, pressing his muzzle into her hair. "I think maybe love is something you only get once," Laney continued, voice thin and tired. "I hope you get it again." Eli stopped the clip. His eyes burned, his throat thick. Ranger, as if sensing something in the air, placed a paw gently on Eli's boot. He stared at the screen for a long time before finally opening his search database. It took a few minutes to find it, but there it was. Missing person report, Laney Morrison. Age 7. Filed January 15th, 2021. Boulder County. Status, case closed. Custody, transferred to biological father. Location confidential. Eli frowned. That made no sense. If she'd been placed with her father, why had she ended up buried under trauma, with only a dog and a pink backpack for protection? He dug deeper. Police reports, social services entries, anything. Then he found a name. Jonah Greer, former CPS case manager, terminated April 2021. There was a note attached to the file. Conflict of interest, unsubstantiated reports, failure to adhere to protocol. And then, as if on cue, his inbox pinged. From J. Greer, Lainey.unlisted@protonmail.com. Subject: Lainey. I remember her. I filed 3 reports. No one listened. Then I was suspended, then fired. There's a system built to silence people like her, but I kept everything. I didn't know where to send it until I saw your name in the county scanner. We should talk, soon, before they bury it again. Attached was a scanned copy of a handwritten note. It was a post-it with child's writing, the same purple marker Eli had seen in the journal. Ranger is my hero, but I think heroes get tired too. Eli leaned back in his chair, the weight of it all pressing into his ribs like concrete. He opened another video. This one showed the man, Derek, yelling into a phone in the kitchen. Lainey sat at the table, drawing again, small and quiet like a shadow. The call was loud enough to hear. They said if we settle the malpractice claim, I'll have to give up the dog. I'm not doing that. I'll make it look like an accident. I swear. That damn dog looks at me like it knows, like she's still in there. Eli paused the feed, breathing heavily. It was all there. Neglect, abuse, threats, a cover-up. He glanced at Ranger, now resting his chin on the toe of Eli's boot. That look in his eyes, calm, resigned, but ancient, wasn't animal. It was memory. It was grief. Eli stood up, unplugged the USB, and carefully sealed it back into the evidence envelope. He wasn't just chasing shadows anymore. He was following a Whisper Lainey's whisper, and it had led him straight into the dark heart of something monstrous. He picked up the phone and called a contact in Boulder County records. "Detective Carson," said a young woman on the other end. "How can I help?" "I need sealed case files. Lainey Morrison. And any connection between Derek Morrison and malpractice litigation involving St. Mary's Hospital." There was a long pause. "I'm not sure I'm authorized." "This isn't about protocol," Eli said, voice firm. "This is about a girl who begged her dog to find help." Another pause. "I'll see what I can do." He hung up and turned to Ranger. "You kept your promise, didn't you?" Eli said. "You survived. And now it's my turn." The Wyoming border was flanked by endless miles of frost-bitten plains, barren cottonwoods, and skies that stretched wider than reason. Eli Carson drove through it all in a borrowed unmarked SUV, Ranger seated in the passenger seat, alert but relaxed, his head resting on the window like a sentry returning from war. The dashboard read 23 degrees, but it felt colder than that, one of those days where even breath froze in midair. It had taken Eli less than a day to trace Jonah Greer. The ex-social worker had dropped out of sight after his dismissal, bouncing from town to town under cash names and burner phones. But people who once cared don't vanish entirely, they just learn to go quiet. According to a contact in Denver, Jonah was currently squatting in a remote cabin just south of Buffalo, Wyoming. The man had taken up handyman work in exchange for rent, kept to himself, and occasionally visited the local library to read old legal journals. Off the grid, but not disconnected. Eli slowed the SUV as the gravel road turned to a snowy track that wound through a sparse forest. Cabin smoke puffed into the gray sky. Ranger sat up straighter, ears twitching. When they reached the clearing, Eli parked beside a weather-worn pickup, then stepped out and scanned the trees. The cabin was small, one story, with warped siding and patched shingles. A single porch light flickered. No dogs, no cameras, just quiet. Ranger didn't wait for a command. He stepped out of the car and padded ahead, tail low but confident. The door opened before they could knock. Jonah Greer stood in the frame, lanky, mid-40s, wrapped in a plaid shirt and thermal vest that had seen better decades. His brown beard was flecked with gray, and deep hollows carved beneath his eyes like bruises that never healed. He didn't look like someone dangerous. He looked like someone who had been right one too many times and paid for it. "You brought the dog," Jonah said, voice quiet but firm. "I brought the truth," Eli replied. Jonah stepped aside. Inside, the cabin smelled of kerosene and burnt toast. Books stacked in uneven towers lined the walls, Mostly case law and psychology journals, spines cracked from overuse. The heat came from a dented steel stove near the back. A worn recliner sat next to a folding table covered in papers, USBs, and yellowed file folders. "Coffee?" Jonah offered. Eli shook his head. "I need the file." Jonah didn't hesitate. He walked to a locked trunk, used a key around his neck, and lifted the lid. Inside was a folder sealed with duct tape and labeled Morrison, LM. He handed it over with both hands, as if it were something sacred. Eli sat and opened it. Photos, court transcripts, internal memos, all the pieces that had never made it into any official investigation. He thumbed through the records quickly, his fingers stiff with anger. Laney's mother, Tricia Morrison, multiple rehab stints. Arrested for possession. Lost custody briefly in 2018, but regained it with testimony from Derek, who she claimed was in recovery. Jonah leaned against the table, arms crossed. He wasn't. And he wasn't her husband. Just a boyfriend with a clean enough record and a manipulative streak a mile wide. There were complaints. 3, Jonah nodded. Filed by neighbors, reports of yelling, a crying child, but each time CPS sent someone out, the house was spotless and Laney was too scared to speak. Then Derek filed a civil suit against CPS for harassment. The agency caved. I kept digging. That's why they fired me. Eli turned to page an internal memo, written by Jonah himself. Recommendation: remove child from current household. Suspected emotional and physical abuse. Psychological risk. No one listened, Jonah said. They will now. Eli slid a photograph across the table. It was the one from the buried box Laney, Ranger, and Derek in the background. That photo was buried near a tree behind my house in Ash Hollow, Eli said. Ranger led me there, same day I found the USB. Jonah's eyes flicked to the dog. He survived. He didn't just survive, he waited. They sat in silence a moment before Jonah added, There's something else. I talked to a friend who used to work at St. Mary's Hospital in Boulder. Derek wasn't just Laney's guardian. He filed a malpractice suit after she died. Claimed negligence during emergency care, settled out of court, $500,000. Eli rubbed his forehead. She was already gone before they brought her in, wasn't she? Jonah didn't answer, but the stillness said enough. As Eli prepared to leave, Jonah handed him a smaller envelope. That's a duplicate of everything, in case something happens to me. Back in the SUV, Ranger curled into the seat again, his breathing calm. Outside, snow began to fall, slow, steady, silent. The kind of snow that covers tracks, hides mistakes, buries truth. On the way home, Eli received a text from Rachel, a video file. He opened it at a gas station, the phone propped on the dash while Ranger stretched outside. The footage showed a quiet living room, his own. Rachel had clearly set up a motion sensor camera while house-sitting. Ranger sat facing the front door, his pink backpack beside him. Hours passed. Ranger didn't move. At midnight, he rested his head on the bag, eyes still open. At 3 a.m., he sat up again. The video ended at dawn, with Ranger finally dozing off, one paw wrapped protectively around the faded pink strap. Eli swallowed hard. This dog hadn't been waiting for rescue. He had been standing guard, every night. Ash Hollow County Courthouse was not built for stories like this. Its wood-paneled walls and scuffed marble floors had seen shoplifters and traffic fines, domestic disputes, and land-use hearings. But on that cold, gray morning, as the wind clawed at the courthouse steps and frost formed on the window panes, something heavier settled in the air, like the silence before a verdict is spoken, or the breath before a truth is finally set free. Eli Carson stood outside the courtroom in his pressed uniform, papers clutched tightly in his calloused hands. Next to him sat Ranger, wearing a navy blue support vest donated by a local rescue nonprofit. His ears twitched at every sound, but his body remained calm. Still and grounded. Like he knew this day was for him, and for the little girl whose scent he still carried in his fur. The courtroom doors opened with a creak. Case 14-376. Petition to determine ownership and custody of canine. Subject, Ranger, announced the clerk. Eli stepped in, heart steady, gaze locked. The courtroom was modest, with 2 long pews on each side, a raised judge's bench, and an aging American flag drooping in the corner. Judge Marla Haynes, a compact woman in her 60s with silver hair tied in a tight bun and eyes like weathered granite, presided from the bench. She was known in the region for fairness and a zero-tolerance policy on cruelty animal or human. Her reputation was not for warmth, but for justice. Derek Morrison was already seated at the petitioner's table. He looked nothing like the man in the photo. Time and arrogance had hardened him. His once neat hair was slicked back, thinning at the temples, and his face bore a smug smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wore a charcoal gray suit and brought a lawyer with him, Richard Brenner, slick, thin, and clearly annoyed to be in a county courtroom. The gallery had only a few onlookers. Rachel sat in the back, hands clasped tightly, lips pursed. A woman and child took a seat quietly behind Eli. The woman, Sarah Linwood, was in her mid-30s, slender and tall, with long auburn hair tied in a braid down her back. Her eyes were tired but fiercely protective. Her daughter, Mia, sat beside her 6 years old, small, delicate, with short-cropped dark curls and a white dress beneath a wool coat far too big for her. Mia had been selectively mute since she was 4 after being pulled from a bad foster situation. The judge nodded. "Mr. Morrison, you are claiming ownership of the German Shepherd in question?" "Yes, Your Honor," Derek replied smoothly. "Ranger was my property. I have vet records, adoption paperwork from 4 years ago, and photographs confirming he lived in my household." Eli stepped forward. "Your Honor, I have evidence that Mr. Morrison used this animal in the psychological abuse of a child, Lainey Morrison. I also have a recorded statement, visual evidence, and an unregistered microchip showing no formal adoption." "Submit your evidence, Officer Carson." Eli handed over a thick folder. Inside were the photos, the journal, the scanned files from Jonah, video stills from the USB, and a written testimony. He also had Lainey's drawing of her and Ranger beneath the tree, with the words, "Me plus Ranger equals safe place." "I'd also like to submit a video clip," Eli said. The courtroom lights dimmed as the clerk played the file. Lainey's voice, whispering into Ranger's ear, echoed through the speakers. "If you're still alive one day, please find someone good." A hush fell. Ranger lifted his head, ears alert. Then came the final clip, Derek's voice, recorded mid-phone call. "I'll make it look like an accident. That damn dog looks at me like it knows, like she's still in there." Judge Haynes leaned back slowly. "Mr. Brenner, care to comment?" Brenner cleared his throat, visibly flustered. "My client's past parenting decisions are not under question here. This is a matter of property." Suddenly, a small voice cut through the room. "He's not property." Everyone turned. Mia had stood up. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but clear. "He's a hero. Lainey's hero." Sarah gasped, eyes filling with tears. "Mia." The girl stepped forward, her small hand clutching Ranger's vest. "He used to live with me, too. Before, with the yelling." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Miss Linwood?" Sarah stood. "Mia was placed with Derek Morrison briefly 2 years ago. It was an emergency foster placement. She never spoke a word again until today." Eli crouched beside Ranger, who now stood fully, gaze fixed on Derek. A low, rumbling growl formed deep in his chest. Then, for the first time since he was found, Ranger barked. It was not aggressive, it was a roar of defiance, of memory. Derek flinched visibly. "That's ridiculous. It's just a dog." Judge Haynes raised her hand. "I've heard enough. Mr. Morrison, you are hereby found in violation of Colorado State Penal Code 18-92202, cruelty to animals, as well as neglect and psychological harm to a minor. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds you unfit for animal custody." Derek stood abruptly, face red with rage. "That dog was mine." "No," the judge said, voice steely. That dog was never yours. He was hers, and he's his now. She turned to Eli. Officer Carson, this court awards you permanent custody of Ranger. The gavel came down once, echoing like thunder. As the room slowly cleared, Sarah knelt beside Mia. You did good, sweetheart, she whispered. Laney would be proud. Mia nodded, then looked at Ranger. He remembers her. Eli knelt beside them, scratching behind Ranger's ear. We all do. The frost had melted from the eaves. Ash Hollow had begun to thaw under the long-awaited breath of spring. Buds peeked from the ends of branches, the grass came back in streaks of green, and the air, though still crisp in the morning, no longer bid it kissed. Birds returned to the old oak in Eli's backyard, and wind chimes danced in the breeze like forgotten lullabies rediscovered. 6 months had passed. The house no longer smelled like loss. It smelled like cinnamon toast and watercolor paint. It echoed with little feet on hardwood and laughter that came in fits and starts, like someone relearning how to trust sound again. Eli Carson stood in the kitchen, barefoot on cool tile, flipping pancakes. He wore a faded blue t-shirt and flannel pajama pants, and a little flour smudged his stubbled cheek. His face had softened since winter, not in years, but in edges. He still woke at 5 a.m. and drank coffee like it was a ritual, but now there was an extra mug always used, always washed, always full. Mia sat cross-legged at the dining table, her chin resting on her fists. Her hair had grown longer since that day in court, now clipped back with rainbow barrettes. She wore mismatched socks and a glitter unicorn t-shirt. Beside her sat a well-loved plush rabbit named Marbles and a plastic bowl filled with dry cereal she never ate but insisted on preparing herself. Across the room, Ranger lay stretched under the window, one paw tucked under his chest, the other resting protectively on a pink backpack, or what used to be one. Mia had covered the old fabric in stickers rainbows, shooting stars, paw prints, and a lopsided heart she drew with a silver marker. The zipper had been replaced, the tears patched with colorful thread. Where once the bag had held despair, it now held drawings, crumpled snack wrappers, and notes written in bright crayons. It had become hers and his, a shared shrine of everything they'd survived. Every night, Ranger lay beside Mia's bed, nose tucked against the backpack, his eyes blinking slowly in the glow of her fairy-light nightlamp. He no longer startled in his sleep, no longer woke, panting or trembling. The growls had faded into soft sighs, and the standoffish stillness was replaced with occasional tail wags and happy grunts when he stretched after a nap. He had healed the only way a dog could, not through therapy, not through words, but through presence, consistency, and the quiet knowing that he was finally, irrevocably safe. So had Mia. It had taken weeks for her voice to return in full at first, just small sentences. Good boy, Ranger. Or, more syrup, please. Then came questions, stories, songs. She sang off-key in the bath, narrated her dreams to the fridge, and whispered secrets to the garden gnomes behind the porch steps. Eli never stopped her, and she never stopped calling Ranger Laney's hero. "Pancakes done," Eli announced, flipping the last onto a plate. Mia scooted eagerly to the counter, dragging her chair with an ear-splitting scrape. Ranger followed behind her, ever the quiet guardian. As they ate, Mia pulled something from her backpack, a drawing. "This is us," she said proudly. Eli leaned closer. The page was filled with a house under a big yellow sun. A tall man with white hair and suspiciously long arms stood beside a girl with curly hair and a dog wearing a gold crown. In the background, 2 angels floated in the sky, one with a ponytail and a blue dress, the other with a badge and glasses. Eli swallowed, hard. "Martha?" he asked. Mia nodded. "And Grace?" He kissed the top of her head. After breakfast, they went into the backyard. The morning was drenched in dew, and the sky was cloudless. Mia raced ahead in rain boots and a tutu skirt, Ranger galloping beside her with a joyful bark that echoed off the fence. She shrieked with laughter as he chased her, then spun to throw a ball made from knotted socks. Ranger caught it midair and tumbled to the ground in exaggerated victory. Eli sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee, watching them. It was quiet in his chest now, not hollow, but full, like the grief had settled in, not as a wound, but as a room, a place he could visit, but didn't have to live in anymore. Inside the house, on the mantel above the fireplace, stood a photo of Grace, 10 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, and a newer one beside it, Mia hugging Ranger, both of them half covered in finger paint, laughing into the sun. Beside the frames sat the pink backpack. It no longer carried pain, it carried memory, and the memory had been rewritten. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are not loud. They don't arrive with thunder or fire. They come quietly on 4 tired paws, in a whisper from a child who had forgotten how to speak, or in the silence of a dog who never gave up waiting. This story is not just about pain or loss. It's about the healing that comes when we choose love over fear, compassion over comfort, and presence over promises. Ranger never spoke a word, yet he became a voice for the voiceless, and in the end, through the heart of a little girl and the hands of a broken man who dared to care again, he found his home. Sometimes we ask where God is in our darkest moments, but maybe, just maybe, he's in the ones who show up, in the officer who listens, in the neighbor who cares, in the child who dares to speak, and yes, even in a scarred, silent dog guarding a pink backpack under the snow, if you believe that no animal should ever be abandoned. If you believe that every child deserves to feel safe and loved, if you believe that miracles still happen when love chooses to stay, then share this story. Let someone out there know they are not alone. Comment, Amen, if this touched your heart. Subscribe if you believe every soul deserves a second chance. And may God bless every single one of you watching, wherever you are. Because sometimes healing doesn't come in lightning. It comes in the form of a dog who simply refused to leave. Amen.
Stray German Shepherd dragged a black bag into the ER. What was inside made everyone froze. It began with chaos. The automatic doors of Mercer General Hospital swung open with a sudden burst, startling the receptionist behind the desk and drawing sharp glances from patients waiting in the crowded lobby. For a moment, everyone assumed it was another emergency, another stretcher or frantic call for a trauma team. But instead, it was a dog. A large, sandy-furred German Shepherd with matted fur and a limp in his right leg bounded through the doorway, panting heavily, eyes fixed ahead with unsettling focus. He looked wild, ragged, and determined. Before anyone could react, a security guard shouted, rising from his stool. "Get that dog out of here," he called. 2 nurses instinctively backed away. An elderly patient let out a frightened gasp. The dog did not bark. He did not lunge. He carried something in his mouth, a heavy, black plastic garbage bag, torn near the top but tightly gripped in his jaws. The bag sagged slightly, something inside shifting with every step the dog took. No one noticed that at first. They only saw a stray dog breaking hospital protocol and moving with alarming speed through the main corridor. "Call animal control," someone said. A few began chasing after him, their shoes squeaking on the linoleum. He did not stop. The German Shepherd darted past a gurney being rolled through triage, slipped through a narrowing hallway, and turned sharply left into the staff corridor near the east wing. He passed vending machines, a janitor's closet, and startled 2 interns who nearly dropped a tray of supplies. He moved as if he had been here before, or perhaps as if something much deeper than memory was guiding him. He reached the staff break room. Inside, 3 nurses were seated at a small round table. One was scrolling through her phone, another flipping through a chart, and the third sipping lukewarm coffee. The sudden appearance of the dog brought all 3 to their feet. "Whoa! What the—" the nurse with the coffee exclaimed, spilling some on her scrubs. "Get it out!" another shouted, reaching for the door. But the third, a younger nurse named Erin Walker, did not move. She saw his eyes, not wild, not aggressive, focused. pleading. And then she saw the bag. Something inside shifted. Erin stepped forward, slowly, carefully, crouching down. "It is okay," she whispered. "It is okay, boy." The dog froze, then gently laid the bag down on the floor, stepping back 2 paces. Erin reached for the torn plastic, her heart beginning to race. The moment she opened the bag, her breath caught in her throat. Inside was a newborn baby, tiny, blue-lipped, silent. For a terrible moment, Erin thought the child was already gone, but then she saw it. A faint rise and fall in the chest. A flicker of life, fragile but present. "Call a code," she screamed. The other nurses rushed for the emergency line. In seconds, a crash team arrived, and the baby was swept into a neonatal unit down the hall. Orders were barked, equipment brought in. A doctor immediately began assessing vitals. Erin stayed behind. The dog was still there, sitting now, watching the hallway where the baby had disappeared. She approached him again. "I do not know where you came from," she murmured, "but you saved that baby." She extended her hand, palm open. The German shepherd looked at her, then leaned forward, allowing her fingers to brush his fur. It was the first kind touch he had received in years. Long before he stepped through the hospital's doors with that black bag clenched in his jaws, Toby had walked alone through the shadows of a city that barely noticed he existed. No one had ever named him Toby, not officially, but that was what the children at the park used to call him, years ago, when his coat had been shinier and his eyes a little less tired. Back then, he had belonged to someone. A boy named Max, no more than 8 years old, with a freckled face and a laugh that echoed through the neighborhood like wind chimes. They had been inseparable. Toby slept at the foot of Max's bed, waited for him outside the school gate, and ran beside his bike as they raced down the sidewalk every summer afternoon. But the family left. There was no warning, no goodbye. Just one morning, the moving truck was gone. The door was locked, and Toby sat on the porch for days, waiting. Eventually, hunger spoke louder than loyalty, and he left. What followed were years of alleyways and chain-link fences, of cold nights curled beneath dumpsters, of dodging boots and angry voices. People rarely offered food. More often, they offered kicks. Trust faded, replaced by instinct. Survival became his only rhythm. But even instincts can be disrupted. That morning, Toby was searching for scraps behind a familiar bakery 2 blocks from the river. The scent of bread crusts and old coffee mingled with garbage. He moved slowly, his back leg aching from an old wound. Then he smelled something else. Not food, not rot, something alive. Behind a stack of broken boxes was a torn garbage bag, tied at the top but barely holding together. Something inside had moved. Toby froze, ears perked. He sniffed closer. There was warmth, faint but real, and something else, an unfamiliar but unmistakable scent of fragility, life, helplessness. He nuzzled the bag. The knot gave way. Inside, wrapped in a stained towel, was a baby. Tiny, motionless, lips pale, but the chest rose, just barely. Toby stared. He could have walked away, could have gone back to the bakery, to the streets, to the rhythm of survival, but something stirred in him. Not memory, something deeper. Perhaps the echo of Max's laugh, or the warmth of that bed where he once slept without fear. He gripped the edge of the bag with his teeth. It was heavy, but he pulled. Down sidewalks, across alleys, through intersections. A car honked, a pedestrian shouted, a shopkeeper tried to shoo him away. He did not stop. Toby limped past places he had once known, ignoring the pain in his legs and the strange glances. He remembered the white building with sliding glass doors. There were always people there, people with coats and wheels and flashing lights. Maybe someone inside would help. By the time he reached Mercer General Hospital, his muscles ached, his breath came in short rasps, and the baby inside the bag had grown colder. But he had made it, and he refused to let go. The neonatal intensive care unit pulsed with urgency. Bright lights illuminated pale walls and stainless steel equipment. Beeping monitors created a relentless rhythm as a team of nurses and doctors surrounded the infant, working quickly and with practiced precision. The baby, later to be known as Hope, was dangerously cold. Her heart rate was weak, her breathing shallow. She had no identification, no history, no known parent, only a black garbage bag and a dog who would not leave. Dr. Benjamin Strauss, a veteran neonatologist with silver at his temples and eyes that had seen too many tiny lives slip away, placed a hand on the infant's chest and frowned. "We need warming blankets, oxygen, and fluids, now. No delay. Let's move." Within moments, Hope was connected to machines that began to stabilize her body temperature and assist her breathing. Her skin, once grayish-blue, began to pinken ever so slightly. A nurse checked her vitals again and gave a small, hopeful nod. Outside the NICU's viewing window, Erin Walker stood with her arms crossed, watching through the glass. Her heart was still pounding, not only from the shock of what had happened, but from something deeper, something older. There was a look in the baby's face that pierced through years of sorrow. Erin blinked hard. Downstairs, in a quiet recovery bay the hospital used for overnight animal patients, Toby lay on a fleece blanket provided by one of the emergency techs. A veterinarian named Dr. Lou was examining him carefully. The dog had collapsed soon after the baby was taken from him, his strength spent from the long journey. One of his back legs was swollen and infected. His ribs showed through his coat. He was clearly malnourished. But he had survived, and now someone was caring for him. Erin entered the room quietly. Dr. Lou looked up. "He is exhausted and injured, but nothing life-threatening. It will take time. He is not chipped, no tags, probably on the streets for years." Erin crouched beside the dog. "Toby," she said softly. The name came out of nowhere, formed not by logic but by instinct. The dog lifted his head, slowly. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them. "You are a fighter," she whispered. "You and her both." Dr. Lou watched silently, sensing something unspoken between them. After a pause, she said, "He needs rest, antibiotics, food, and someone who will not throw him back out onto the street." Erin nodded. "He is coming with me." The hospital had protocols, of course, forms to sign, temporary custody waivers, but no one argued. Everyone had seen what he had done. A dog had dragged a newborn baby from the filth of an alley to the safety of medicine and light. No one questioned where he belonged now. 3 weeks later, Toby stood in Erin's small backyard, sniffing the edge of a flower bed. His coat was still patchy, but fuller. He had gained weight. His limp was barely noticeable. He had a new collar, a proper nameplate, and a quiet understanding that the place he slept each night would not be taken from him again. Inside the house, Erin sat by the fireplace, with a soft blue blanket in her lap. The baby had made a full recovery. No one had come forward to claim her. The authorities had launched an investigation, but it turned up nothing. No cameras, no witnesses, no parents. They named her Hope. The staff agreed it was the only name that fit. Erin had applied for emergency foster care. She knew it would not be easy. She was single, worked long hours, and still carried the ache of a child lost 2 years prior in a miscarriage that had left her world hollow. But when the caseworker asked her why she wanted to take this child in, she had answered honestly. Because she did not give up, and because neither did the dog who saved her. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in soft gold, Erin returned home cradling Hope in her arms. Toby was waiting at the door, his ears alert. She knelt beside him, letting Hope rest gently in his line of sight. "She is back with you," she said. Toby leaned forward, sniffed the baby's blanket, then laid his head beside her tiny hand. For the first time in both their lives, they were home. By early spring, the rhythms of life inside Aaron's modest home had changed. Where once silence lingered in the corners of the house, now there were soft coos, the hum of lullabies from a radio in the kitchen, the quiet rustle of blankets, and the gentle pads of Toby's paws as he moved from room to room, always checking, watching. Toby had transformed in the months since that night at the hospital. His coat was healthier, the haunted look in his eyes had faded, and he had gained not only weight but purpose. He slept beside Hope's crib each night, rising whenever she stirred. If she cried, he would trot to Aaron's bedside, nudge her gently, then hurry back to keep watch. It was not obedience, it was devotion. Aaron was healing too. There were still moments when old memories stirred, when she would catch a glimpse of the framed ultrasound that still sat on her dresser, or when she would pause while folding laundry, overcome with the weight of how close she had come to missing all of this. But then she would look at Hope's face, at Toby's ever-present silhouette, and the ache would soften into something quieter, something grateful. Then came the day when everything changed again. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Aaron had just returned from the grocery store, juggling bags of produce and formula while Hope dozed in her carrier on the kitchen counter. Toby, as always, was nearby. The knock came without warning. 3 sharp raps. Aaron froze, a bag of apples slipping slightly from her grasp. She was not expecting anyone. Through the window, she could just make out a figure on the porch. A man, tall, hooded, face shadowed. She opened the door a few inches, keeping the safety chain latched. "Yes?" The man looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, his expression tense. He smelled of sweat and alcohol. "That baby," he said. "She's mine. I want her back." Aaron's breath caught. I think you have the wrong She's mine," the man repeated, louder now. "I know what hospital she was at. I know who took her." Aaron slammed the door shut. Her heart thundered. Hope stirred behind her, sensing the tension. Toby stood now, body rigid, ears alert. The man pounded on the door again. "You do not get to keep her. She is not yours." Aaron rushed to the phone to dial 911, her hands trembling. "There is a man outside. He is threatening me and my foster daughter. Please, hurry." Then the sound of glass. The side window shattered. The man was in the house. Aaron screamed. Hope cried out. And then Toby moved. Like lightning, the dog lunged from the kitchen, intercepting the intruder before he could cross the living room. His jaws locked around the man's arm, dragging him to the floor. The man screamed, flailing, but Toby did not let go. Aaron grabbed Hope and ran to the hallway, huddling behind the coat closet, her entire body shaking. Police sirens wailed in the distance. By the time officers arrived, the man was still pinned beneath Toby's weight, his arm bleeding, eyes wide with disbelief. Toby stood over him, teeth bared but silent. He had not barked once. Later, as paramedics treated the suspect and officers took statements, one deputy turned to Aaron. "That dog saved your life," he said. Aaron looked down at Toby, now seated calmly at her feet, eyes still scanning every shadow. "He already did once," she said softly. "This was just his way of making sure." The sun rose gently over the rooftops of the quiet neighborhood, casting long golden rays through the bedroom window. In the soft morning light, baby Hope cooed softly in her crib, arms wiggling, eyes blinking sleepily. Beside her, as always, lay Toby. His head rested on his paws, one ear flicking slightly as her movement stirred him from slumber. He lifted his head and looked at her, then at the door, instinctively checking for danger. There was none. Not today. It had been 6 weeks since the break-in. The man, identified later as a transient with a criminal record and substance abuse issues, had confessed under police interrogation. He admitted to abandoning the baby in a moment of panic and despair, then trying to reclaim her after learning through word of mouth that she had survived. He was now in custody, facing charges of child endangerment, unlawful entry, and attempted abduction. The case had drawn media attention. "Hero dog saves baby twice" made headlines. A local journalist visited Aaron's home for an interview, and the story quickly spread beyond state lines. Letters and care packages poured in. Dog treats from school children, blankets for hope, thank you cards filled with hand-drawn hearts and paw prints. A city councilwoman arranged for a formal commendation. On a bright Saturday morning, a small crowd gathered in the city park. Aaron stood in front of a podium, holding Hope in her arms, with Toby seated dutifully at her side. The mayor presented Toby with a silver medallion engraved with the words, "For loyalty beyond words." It was attached to a new leather collar, one he wore with pride. The crowd applauded, and Hope squealed in delight, clapping her tiny hands. Toby gave a modest wag of his tail, but the ceremony was only part of the story. In the weeks that followed, Aaron finalized the paperwork to officially adopt Hope. The process was thorough, filled with background checks, home visits, and questions from social workers. But Aaron answered each one with quiet certainty. When asked about her support system, she simply glanced at the dog lying across her feet and said, "I am never alone." On the day the judge signed the adoption decree, Aaron held Hope close and whispered, "You are mine, forever." That evening, the three of them returned home. The house felt fuller, warmer. In the living room, there was a framed photo of the day they had all first met. A hospital hallway, a black bag, a nurse kneeling beside a worn-down dog with the eyes of a guardian. Aaron placed Hope in her crib and sat down beside Toby on the rug. "I used to think I saved you," she said, running her fingers gently through his fur, "but you have saved both of us. Twice." Toby leaned against her, eyes half closed, letting out a quiet sigh. He had no words to offer, only presence, only peace. Outside, stars began to bloom across the sky. Hope slept, the soft sound of her breath rising and falling in rhythm with the life around her. Aaron rested her head against the armchair, her hand still touching Toby's side. They were not the family anyone had expected, but they were whole, and they were safe, because sometimes home is not a place. Sometimes it is a second chance. And sometimes it has fur, 4 legs, and the heart of a guardian. In a world where many walk past suffering without pause, one stray dog chose to act. Toby, once forgotten and broken, became the unexpected hero who saved a life twice, and in doing so he found something he never thought he would have again: a home, a family, and love without condition. Hope now grows up, surrounded by warmth, safety, and the quiet strength of the dog who never gave up on her. And Aaron, who once lived with loss, has discovered that healing sometimes arrives in the most unexpected forms, wrapped in fur and loyalty. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Amazing Paws Stories. We share true and inspired tales of animals who change lives, and lives that change animals. Do not miss the next story that might just restore your faith in the world. Click subscribe now and join us every week for more unforgettable journeys.